Good morning. Welcome to the Rangers Roost. My name is Tennyson Stead. Here, let's drop this camera down a little bit. That's better. Welcome to the Rangers Roost. My name is Tennyson E. Stead. I am the creator and writer of Jump Rangers. And this is just a weekly chat session where I sit down, see who's online, and talk with anybody who shows up about the current events in my life and in geek culture and in the larger culture, as well. And we don't have anybody on stream right now, which means I just kind of sit here and talk about whatever's been on my mind lately, creatively, until somebody shows up and gets me to change. And with that in mind, I've been thinking a lot. I'm not going to go into details because client details are confidential. Um, but more and more, I'm seeing evidence in screenplays and in distributed films and television that China is paying for our media. And I'm seeing more and more overt evidence to this effect. And it's something that I want to bring to everybody's attention because when the Chinese government, it matters where you get your money from when you produce media, okay? Producing a film or producing a television show, and I would say more so producing a film, is, especially independently, it's always an act of desperation. It's a terrifying process. You have a lot of people's well being on your shoulders, and you need to make sure that everybody's attended to and looked after and cared for. And and you're never going to have enough money to do it, and that's a tough situation to be in, and it's a systemic problem. And producers in Hollywood live in a culture where they're very encouraged to sort of accept the necessary evils that come of those systemic problems as just part of the process and move forward and not look too closely at the ethical challenges that crop up over the course of that process, because ethical challenges make a film more expensive. That's what happens. One of the big ethical questions that you're going to face over the course of a movie is this place that I'm getting this money from going to introduce any conflicts of interest? Right? In terms of what I'm trying to accomplish with the film. Do these financiers want things that are not in the best interest of my audience? And to what extent are these wants going to impact the well being of my audience? What are my obligations to my audience? This is one of those questions that producers oftentimes will sidestep in the interest of getting a movie made. So, we're going to talk a little bit about film finance. But in the late 90s, the early 90s, let's say, there was a development in the relationship between banks and the motion picture industry that up until then had never happened before. Film has always been regarded as a speculative or high risk industry because there aren't a lot of assets to leverage, right? The film either sells tickets or it doesn't. The film either sells Blu-rays and DVDs or it doesn't. It either generates capital or it doesn't. You invest in the film and you share in the profits, just like in theater, right? Because once And once you have money to make a movie, you go ahead and you spend that money on talent. You buy actors, you buy sets, you buy things that have no value outside of the film. So it's not there's no point in taking out a loan to make a movie, because if things start to go bad, what are you going to sell other than the movie? You have to finish the movie. You have to make the business profitable. You can't like sell this here and move that there, and there's no assets, right? So there's no collateral, so there's no loan. Well, in the 90s, the pre-sales market was invented, which basically means it was discovered that foreign sales agents could go to Cannes, could go to Berlin, the festivals there, specifically the marketplaces at Berlinale and the Cannes Film Festival, and get distributors in foreign countries, people who own movie theaters in foreign countries, exhibitors, to commit to distributing a feature film based on who was in it and how much it cost and what the genre was. So they took these commitments to a bank and took out a loan saying, look, we have promises. They're not promises. They were basically a quote signed by a guy who owns a couple of movie theaters in Azerbaijan, right? When he was drunk on absinthe at 2 in the morning at Cannes. Not a commitment. But the bank doesn't know the difference. They look at these promissory notes, let's call them those, and they issue a loan based on the total value of the commitments that you've gotten. So if you've gone around to all the distributors at the festival and gotten commitments to distribute the film in England, and maybe you've got 50 grand here and 100 grand for distributing in Germany, who knows, right? But you get all these territories to commit nickels and dimes, and then you pile it up. You could, at that point, create a book of promissory notes with a total value of greater than the value of the film. So the bank's like, yeah, take the money, make the movie, deliver it. Now, we live in a culture where debt is very saleable. Debt is probably the most saleable commodity we have. So what happens if the guy from Azerbaijan doesn't pay you? You know, you come back in 2 years, you say, here's the movie. Where's my 10 grand? And he's like, at what point, what happens then? Well, you declare bankruptcy because the film is an LLC. You sell off the debt. What this means is the point is the banks didn't always make money on these movies, but it didn't matter because the debt itself was still an asset. You were generating debt using the motion picture industry, and that had never happened before, so people went nuts for it. As a result of this, it became possible to make money on a movie before it was made, to make money on a movie without selling any movie tickets or VHSs at the time. So the incentives for making movies started to shift. Up until now, up until the 1990s, being a good show person was pretty much how you had to make money in show business. But that changed. So we started to drift away from the fundamentals of our craft and focus on other reasons to make movies. The development process became more and more esoteric because the fundamentals weren't as salient in terms of whether or not your film was profitable. We stopped focusing on them as much, and because of that, the pre-sales market started to erode. Okay, the film exhibitors at Cannes and at Berlinale weren't as interested in our films because we weren't. There's two things you need to be successful in show business: strengthen your craft and strengthen your community. The reason pre-sales was a thing was because all the way through the 90s, people like George Clooney and Julia Roberts were always at Cannes, always at Berlinale, shaking hands and making sure that they knew who was invested in their films and talking to the people who were going to be showing them in foreign countries, taking responsibility for their community. Well, we never got Sam Worthington and the next sort of like generation of stars to do that work because why? We were getting the money. We didn't have to sell any tickets. The game had changed, right? So foreign distributors stopped being as interested. They started to pay a little bit less in pre-sales. Pretty soon, you weren't able to make up the whole budget of a movie in promissory notes anymore. This was maybe the early 2000s. So what did we do? We started to look for other ways to add to that debt because if you investors don't want to go back to a more risky investment. Now that this was a loan and not an investment, now that you weren't putting the money in and kissing it goodbye and hoping things worked out, now that you had debt, investors didn't want to go back, and neither did Hollywood. So we need to find other ways to. So let's say now in the 2000s you're taking a movie over to Cannes and Berlin, and you're getting, let's say, 80% of the budget. Where's that other? And a loan, you don't we want to make money on a loan, so you're not looking for 100% of the budget. You're looking for 115, 120% of the budget in terms of promissory notes. You have a 40% gap to make up there. Okay, where's it going to come from? Well, in the 2000s, it came from tax incentives from places like, well, originally places, other states other than California. Louisiana was a big one. Georgia still offers big tax incentives. Soon it was Canada and Croatia and places in Europe. And the idea behind these tax incentives was that Hollywood was going to start investing in other communities, that we were going to start moving our resources. We did a little bit to Georgia, a little bit, but not really. Louisiana figured out pretty quick that Hollywood was not going to be in Louisiana, and they stopped giving us tax incentives. Right? So now what? And other places like Canada have become much more restrictive in terms of how they issue tax incentives because they figured out that we're just going to take their money and leave. Surprise! We didn't want to move to Canada, which, it makes sense, I guess, that if they made it attractive enough, that we would, but we didn't. So now Hollywood needs to look to other places. And the point that I'm making is that we have found consistently dumber and dumber and dumber ways to sort of pad that debt. Meanwhile, the pre-sales market has only gotten weaker because we put less and less attention into the relationships that created it in the first place. So now we don't have to make up a little 40% gap now in pre-sales. You're lucky if you can get like, 25% or 30% of your budget based on who's in the film. You've got to go and get your money in other ways. So now Hollywood is working out loan deals with people who have a vested interest in controlling the media and in getting messaging out through an apparatus like Hollywood. And and who has the wealth and the will to issue a loan, not an investment, but a loan in exchange for messaging as opposed to in exchange for collateral. On the one hand, it's Dubai, and on the other hand, it's China. Now, I do not know a lot about how things go when you're getting creative notes from a loan broker in Dubai. I haven't had that experience. I think that from the looks of things, I mean, studios like A24 appear to be financed through the Middle East. My sense is that a lot of the sheiks that are pouring money into Hollywood are doing it for the raw appeal of having done it. It seems like they're issuing loans for a lot of the same reasons that people were issuing private investments in the 80s and 90s. China China is not, when you're dealing with a Chinese financial institution, you're not dealing with an individual. You're dealing with the Chinese government because China is a communist country. And All financial institutions are owned by the Chinese government. They're the people's this and the people's that. So, what reason do you think China would have for investing in Hollywood? And this is where I think that producerial mentality of, you know what, I've just got to get this movie made, I've just got to get this done, here's the money, let's go, 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 go. I think it gets people in a whole lot of trouble because China China does have a media plan for the world, right? China has a massive engine of propaganda. People in China aren't allowed to know the same things that we're allowed to know here in America. They're not allowed to have access to the same information. China has gotten very good at controlling information. So when you start getting creative notes, you know, from a bank in China, oh, we're gonna go ahead and finance this movie. We have some thoughts on, right? What kind of notes do you think you're gonna get? I have seen now one of the types of movies that tends to do very well in terms of pre-sales that foreign distributors are consistently hungry for is espionage thrillers. The Bourne Identity and Taken were big ones for the foreign sales market, and that's never really changed. It's why Liam Neeson kept working all the way through the 2000s. Just foreign sales, foreign sales, foreign sales. That's what all those movies were about. Making $20 to $40 million thrillers that you can sell in as many territories as possible, using Liam Neeson as one of the cast members to fuel those pre-sales. So you're going to see a lot of espionage thrillers, international thrillers they're called, in the sales market, packaged in order to make pre-sales work, which means you're going to see a lot of espionage thrillers um, looking for that extra 80% of their budget, which means you're seeing a lot of espionage thrillers eventually wind up asking China for money. More than one script that I have read or seen produced involves, at the end of the second act, a Chinese intelligence official who is assassinating, in the movie, a US government official of some kind or some prominent public political figure or a government official who works for an intelligence agency in the United States for the good of the American people. More than one movie has showcased very prominently the idea that Chinese intelligence operatives working in the United States against the United States government are more trustworthy than the government itself. Where do you think that came from? Is it possible that it was a note from the financiers? We'd like to see a more prominent Chinese character. Okay, well, what would we like that character to be like? Well, I think they should be a spy, and I think that, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I'd just like for this Chinese character to come to the rescue of the American people. How do they, and how do you work as a producer on these films and not see, how do you not see that you're making propaganda at that point against the United States government? It's a little baffling. And, if you start looking at some of the thrillers that are coming out, some of the espionage thrillers that are coming out today, you're going to see this theme more and more and more, you know? And I'm all for inclusiveness. I think having Chinese characters is great. And by the way, I enjoy Chinese cinema, even when the Americans are the stupid, irresponsible meatheads of the movie. It doesn't bother me. I love the Wandering Earth franchise. Love it. But there's a conflict of interest in taking money to produce media from the government of a foreign power who is actively trying to influence your country. That's all I'm saying. And it is beholden to us to consider these kinds of conflicts of interest when we decide to take money from people. Who are we working for here? Because there does come a point where you can't have it both ways. And if you're sending the messaging that we are safer in the hands of a foreign power's intelligence services than we are in the hands of our own government's intelligence services. And by the way, I'm not saying that our institutions aren't corrupt or problematic. I'm not saying that we don't have a truckload of work to do. I'm just saying that it might not be in the best interest of the American people to be producing commercials indicating that Chinese intelligence is the answer to these problems. I don't think it is. Because as much as we've got our issues with human rights, China has them too. In some cases, more so. I'm a little astonished. Anyway, I've seen one of these scripts come across my desk in the last, let's say, 90 hours, and I just wanted to talk about the sort of nuts and bolts about where this messaging has come from. As audience members, I think it's very good for people to be aware of the fact that the financing of our entertainment has changed in some pretty fundamental ways over the last 30 years. I mean, fundamental. And in many ways, Hollywood has opened the door for financing and financial institutions to have a much clearer say in the media that American people are digesting. And we're seeing that in all kinds of shapes and forms. And the way it happened very simply is through laziness. At the end of the day, it's really hard to find investors. Hollywood just got tired of doing it. They wanted to produce more and bigger, and they needed more money than you were going to find from private investment capital. So we started looking for other ways of accomplishing these goals. And in doing so, we we lost our independence. And now the people that we lost our independence to aren't really interested in what we're selling anymore, so we're just kind of like in the wind looking for any port in the storm. And that kind of desperation leads you to make some pretty let's say regrettable choices. And I think that when you look at our financial apparatus in this industry right now, well, I'll put it to you this way: the reason why Disney's able to buy as much as they are, the reason why they're buying other companies, or at least have been, is because while all the other studios were diversifying, well, Paramount and certainly Warner and Universal, maybe less so Paramount, um, have been working on diversifying themselves for the sake of the stock market, basically getting out of the film business and becoming a much more broadly defined corporation. so that there's more value in the stock because there's more markets to participate in. Disney stayed focused on the strength of their craft and the strength of their community. The craft is something that Disney wrestles with, but every time they make Home on the Range, they fire everybody and start fresh. So they're not losing sight of that as a pillar of their institutional power. And on the other side of it, as much as there's problems, for example, with the parks, Disney has invested more in their community than basically any other corporation I can think of, including probably maybe Facebook. But at the end of the day, you know, Walt built the parks because he knew he needed more interaction with the people who were consuming his movies. The parks were Walt saying, "Hey, look, why don't you come hang out and play with my trains for a day? Have a turkey leg, say hi," and creating that venue for people to come and engage. He bought real estate to support his community and to support the growth of his community. And Disney hasn't made any other kinds of investments but those two. And it shows. It shows because they have the backbone to keep pushing for films, and they don't have to look for financing. They don't have to make the same kinds of compromises that other studios and certainly independent film companies are making. So it's hard. There's other conversations we could have about the financing in Hollywood, but I just you know when I see people writing stories about how Chinese intelligence services are going to save us from our companies, our country's fragility and corruption. It raises an eyebrow. That's all. And I wanted to put this in a sort of broader sociological context because I want audience members looking at these kinds of stories and saying, who's paying for this? I think that's a good question to ask. If you see a movie that seems like it has an agenda, even if you're a conservative person and you're concerned about you know what Hollywood might be saying to your kids, don't speculate. Actually find out. You can go on the IMDb. You can look up the financing entities and the production companies supporting the content that you're consuming. Who's paying for it? You can find out the answer to that question in many cases, or at least get a clear hint. And you know, I'll tell you this: it's not gain on profits. It is not the trans community. A lot of the time when you see a push for diversity in entertainment, it's not for any reason other than Hollywood would like our entire audience to feel welcome. On the other hand, when you see a very clear message suggesting that um, foreign powers might be a better place for us to place our faith than our own systems of government, or when you see a general kind of argument or push for more fascist policies in Hollywood, I think you're pretty consistently going to find there's some big money behind that messaging. Well, this was a very political post. I think that's good. It's been a very political week. And I think these are important things for us to be thinking about. I think that our journalistic institutions are in danger right now more than they've been since they were created. I think that the independence of our media is shifting and changing, and we need to change how we consume media to address those problems. We need to get a lot smarter, and hopefully, this discussion helps fuel that process. That's all. Food for thought. Thank you very much for watching. Um, Today's Monday. I'm still waking up. Thursday, I have a stream where I read a chapter from the upcoming Jump Rangers book, which is called Jump Rangers, a game called Conquest. And uh, it's going really well. I finished the rough draft. We're editing right now. It's our first pass. There's going to be quite a few passes. And in the meantime, I'm going to take some time this week to crunch through the Lightning Job, which is the last big book that I have to convert to the Jump Rangers 2. There's a tabletop role playing game and there's a novel. The novel is a game called Conquest. I've got a bunch of supplements written for the tabletop role playing game, the last of which needs to be crunched into the 2.0 rule set, which isn't a big change, but it's a good chance to go through and edit everything. And then I have a whole bunch of little bitty kind of miniature supplements to edit as well, which I'll start cranking through as soon as I finish the Lightning Job. I can get that done this week, I think. And I'll be streaming tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll be streaming on Techer10, twitch.tv/Techer10. I'd like to do Star Citizen. I love, as you can see, I love Star Citizen. And I don't know. I just finished most of my coverage for the month. I finished all my coverage for the month. So it's going to be a slow week unless I can get a screenwriting gig in, which we're going to work on as soon as I get off the stream. So thank you for watching. Don't be a stranger, Ranger, and tune in on Thursday. I'll see you then. Take care.